Everyone thought the lawsuit was long buried a legal corpse with no chance of revival. But Samantha Markle has just flipped the switch on what looks like a ticking time bomb. The defamation case, once dismissed as weak and destined to fade, has been jolted back to life with a strategy designed not merely to question Meghan's words, but to interrogate her intent. This is no longer about careless comments made in the glare of celebrity. It is about whether Meghan deliberately set out to destroy her sister's reputation. The framing has shifted dramatically. Meghan once styled herself as the champion of speaking truth. But Samantha's legal team has cleverly reframed that narrative into something darker, designing truth. The suggestion is devastating. Speaking truth may be noble even if painful, but designing truth implies manipulation, calculation, and malice. It paints Meghan not as a victim silenced by the palace, but as an architect of stories, sculpted to elevate herself while burying others. The revival of the case feels like a zombie staggering back from the grave, only this time it's stronger, meaner, and armed with fresh ammunition. Samantha isn't only pointing at interviews or offhand remarks, she's targeting intent, motive, and the machinery behind Meghan's storytelling. This isn't about slips of the tongue, it's about whether there was a plan. And if a jury is persuaded the consequences could reach far beyond the family feud. Commentators note the irony. Meghan has built her public image around authenticity, but the lawsuit accuses her of weaponizing narrative itself. To Samantha, her sister is not a truth teller, but a strategist calculating how each anecdote, each emotional confession, would tilt public perception. It's a brutal inversion of Meghan's brand, transforming her from the woman who found her voice into the woman who scripted it to cause maximum damage. For Meghan, the danger is existential. This trial is no longer just about whether she misrepresented her family. It's about whether her entire persona, her credibility, her truth was a performance. And in the unforgiving court of public opinion, once people start asking whether your authenticity is fake, the damage can be worse than any legal penalty. The case that once seemed dead now threatens to define Meghan's legacy. Samantha has not only revived it, she has reframed it as a battle for the very definition of truth in the age of celebrity storytelling. Another layer of the story has just been pulled back. At the center of Samantha Markle's revived legal assault is not Meghan's Oprah interview, emotional, impulsive, and easily dismissed as heat-of-the-moment drama, but the Netflix series. Unlike a live conversation, a 6-part documentary has time production teams, editorial oversight, and countless opportunities to correct or retract. And yet Meghan allowed the same claims, the same framing of her sister to be repeated, polished, and broadcast to millions. That is what makes this phase of the lawsuit so potent. Samantha's lawyers argue that Oprah could be excused as a moment of emotional rawness, but Netflix was no accident. It was crafted, scripted, reviewed, and greenlit. In other words, intent can no longer be blurred by spontaneity. The claims weren't blurted, they were approved. And that transforms the issue from miscommunication into alleged malice. The global scale of the platform only amplifies the damage. Netflix beams into 200 million accounts in dozens of languages across nearly every corner of the world. What might once have been a family quarrel whispered in the press has now been translated, subtitled, and streamed into living rooms from Los Angeles to Lagos. In the language of the courtroom, harm is no longer abstract, it is quantifiable. Reputational injury. Samantha's team insists became an international export. The irony cuts deep. Meghan's defenders once pointed to Netflix as the ultimate victory, proof that her story resonated beyond Britain, beyond tabloids, beyond monarchy. But Samantha has flipped that very triumph into a weapon. What Meghan celebrated as her biggest platform may now stand as Exhibit A in proving premeditated defamation. The phrase Netflix original could easily morph into Netflix evidence. Even more damning is the contrast of mediums. Oprah was a conversation. Netflix was a production. With Oprah, Meghan could argue passion overtook her precision. With Netflix, she cannot. The camera angles, the scripts, the edits, all of it suggest careful construction, and if the court agrees that care was taken not to correct but to reinforce damaging narratives, then the legal stakes skyrocket. This is no longer a story about sisterly squabbles. It is about whether the Duchess of Sussex leveraged one of the world's most powerful media platforms to tell not just her truth, but to manufacture a truth at someone else's expense. And if Samantha proves that point, then Meghan's documentary doesn't just tell her story, it becomes the evidence that undoes it. It is hard not to laugh bitterly at this point. Meghan, who once declared she was merely sharing her truth, now faces the allegation that her truth was carefully engineered. Samantha's legal team has unveiled what they claim is a paper trail emails, text messages, and production documents littered with phrases like control fallout and steer narrative. These aren't the words of a woman simply recounting her life. They sound like the language of strategists managing a brand. The thrust of Samantha's argument is devastatingly simple. Meghan weaponized storytelling. Instead of narratives serving as windows into her soul, they became blades aimed outward, designed to cut down rivals, silence critics, and shape public perception in her favor. Storytelling wasn't expression, it was artillery. The evidence, if accepted, adds flesh to that claim. Samantha argues that Meghan's depictions unleashed real-world harm, online harassment, doxing threats to safety, and the psychological wreckage of PTSD. The legal filing even cites medical records and therapy reports to demonstrate the toll. The picture painted is not of abstract reputational bruises, but of concrete, measurable damage a sister reduced to collateral in the making of a global brand. The irony is suffocating. Meghan presented herself as the one silenced the victim of others' cruelty. Now Samantha casts her as the orchestrator pulling strings behind the curtain, scripting wounds for others to endure. In this retelling, Meghan is no longer the heroine fighting the tabloids. She is the producer of her own spectacle, fully aware of the harm it would inflict. And that is where the case gains its sharpest edge. If Samantha can convince a court that Meghan knew the potential consequences of her words and proceeded anyway, the line between personal narrative and malicious intent collapses. The trial would not just be about whether Meghan lied, it would be about whether she used her platform as a weapon, deliberately unleashing millions of followers like a digital army. The metaphor is grim storytelling as a double-edged sword. Meghan once wielded it to carve out her independence, to defend her dignity. But in Samantha's framing, the blade has turned cutting into the very image Meghan sought to protect. What began as catharsis has been recast as calculated harm. If the jury accepts that premise, Meghan will not be remembered for sharing her truth, but for designing a truth and for using it as ammunition in a war her sister never asked to fight. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the case has taken a turn that should make every influencer pause. Samantha's lawyers have introduced the concept of influencer harassment. The argument is deceptively simple. Meghan did not need to instruct anyone to attack her sister. By making her claims in front of millions of followers, she set the stage for an inevitable storm. The hate, the doxing, the threats, those were not accidents. They were foreseeable consequences of celebrity influence. It's a groundbreaking line of attack. In traditional defamation cases, intent is notoriously slippery, but in the age of Instagram, armies, and Twitter mobs, intent doesn't need to be shouted. It can be implied, anticipated, even designed. Meghan's critics argue she knew exactly how her words would be weaponized online. The fact that she proceeded anyway, they claim, proves malice. And yet, this is only the surface of Meghan's potential nightmare. The true danger lies in discovery. If the case advances, she may be compelled to hand over emails, texts, and production notes exchanged with Netflix Oprah's team or her PR advisors. The very communications that polished her image could become exhibits in a trial meant to dismantle it. What Meghan once used to build her brand may be cracked open in court for the world to dissect. The irony is almost cinematic. Meghan, once hailed as the queen of PR, now risks being rebranded as the queen of evidence. Every carefully curated email subject line, every text about narrative control could turn into a smoking gun. Even worse, if discovery reveals that the palace or anyone close to it was looped into these strategies, the fallout could ripple far beyond Montecito, dragging Buckingham itself into the storm. For Meghan, the metaphor is brutal. Discovery is like unlocking a vault. She may control what goes in, but not what comes out. Once opened, the contents are no longer her shield. They're ammunition for the other side. And unlike a glossy documentary, there are no edits in a court filing, no directors to cut the messy parts. What began as a family feud has now evolved into something larger, a potential legal precedent about the power of celebrity influence in the digital age. Meghan isn't just fighting her sister anymore, she's fighting the risk of becoming the first test case in a new legal frontier. This is the moment when everyone must hold their breath. For Meghan, the trial is no longer just about family grievances, it has become a referendum on her entire public identity. Even before a verdict, the ripple effects are already visible. Hollywood executives, streaming platforms, and brand partners are keeping their distance, wary of contracts with morality clauses. In an industry where image is currency, Meghan's stock is suddenly volatile. The stakes could hardly be higher. If she loses, the damages will not be measured only in dollars. The real loss would be credibility, the cornerstone of her brand. A defeat would brand her not as a victim of cruelty, but as the architect of it, a woman who allegedly weaponized storytelling for personal gain. That stain would be nearly impossible to scrub away in an era when reputation spreads faster than any correction. And then comes the domino effect. Once one plaintiff cracks the armor, others may follow. Individuals who believe they were misrepresented in Meghan's interviews, memoirs, or documentaries could file their own claims. What began as one sister's lawsuit could snowball into a chain reaction of litigation. For a public figure who has built her empire on narrative, being sued for the very act of narrating would be a devastating irony. The broader cultural implications are just as seismic. If the court determines that Meghan acted with malicious intent or engaged in weaponized storytelling, it could set a precedent for how influencer speech is judged in the digital age. No longer would celebrities be able to hide behind the vague defense of sharing my truth. Instead, they could be held accountable for the fallout their words unleash on others. Meghan, willingly or not, has become the test case. The metaphor could not be harsher. She once cast herself as a princess of storytelling, wielding narrative like a lantern in the dark. Now she stands accused of turning that lantern into a torch, burning reputations, including potentially her own. The shift is staggering, from global icon to cautionary tale, from survivor to alleged saboteur. For Meghan, the trial is not only about whether she defamed Samantha, it is about whether she can survive in a world where truth is no longer a performance but a legal definition. If she fails, the court's judgment will not just end a lawsuit, it will redefine the boundaries of influence, authenticity, and power in the age of celebrity.